I stood at airport security, my belt coiled in the bin like innocent evidence, when an officer blocked my path. "Ma'am, come with us." Inside a glass room, they read a report labeling me a threat. When I demanded the call log, the name was clear. My father. I thought I was free until my phone buzzed at the gate. "Your flight has been canceled per customer request." Someone was using the airport to delete me from the story. My name is Parker Richardson. And at 6 in the morning, the Charlotte Douglas International Airport felt less like a transit hub and more like a high-stakes obstacle course designed to test the limits of my sanity. I was standing in the security line, gripping the handle of my carry-on bag so tightly that my knuckles had turned the color of old parchment. My flight to Denver was scheduled to depart in exactly 55 minutes. From there, I had a tight 40-minute connection to Durango, a small mountain town where the air was thin and the cell service was spotty. If I missed either of those flights, I would miss the 9 o'clock hearing in La Plata County tomorrow morning. And if I missed that hearing, the gavel would come down and my parents would win. It was a simple equation. Really. Presence equaled power. Absence equaled forfeiture. I shuffled forward 3 inches, the wheels of my suitcase squeaking in protest against the linoleum floor. The line for the Transportation Security Administration checkpoint snaked back and forth like a dying river. I checked my watch for the 4th time in 1 minute. The second hand seemed to be dragging itself through molasses. I looked at the digital board above the checkpoint, which claimed the wait time was 20 minutes. It lied. I could tell by the density of the crowd, the sheer number of unlaced boots and confused travelers fumbling with water bottles, that this was going to take 30 minutes or more. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a phantom vibration against my thigh. I ignored it. I knew who it was. My mother had been texting me since 4 in the morning, sending messages that were masterpieces of passive-aggressive manipulation. "You do not need to come, Parker. It is just a formality. Dad and I have everything under control. You will just be traumatized seeing the house again. Stay in Charlotte. We will call you when it is over." Every text message was a brick in the wall they were trying to build between me and my grandfather's legacy. They had been doing this since the funeral 3 weeks ago in Asheville. I remembered standing by the open grave, the smell of wet earth and lilies cloying in the humid air. While my father stood with his hand on my shoulder, his grip had been firm, too firm. Less like a comfort and more like a restraint. He had leaned in close, his voice a low rumble that did not carry to the other mourners. He had told me to go home. He had told me that I looked tired, that I was not thinking clearly, that the estate business was complicated and ugly and best left to the adults. I am 32 years old. I manage infrastructure projects worth millions of dollars for Crestline Infrastructure Group. I know how to read a timeline. I know how to spot a critical path. And right now, the critical path to the truth about my grandfather's will led directly through a courtroom in Colorado. And my parents were doing everything short of physically tackling me to keep me off that path. I finally reached the plastic bins. The air smelled of stale coffee and nervous sweat. I grabbed 2 gray trays, the plastic clattering loudly in the morning din. I moved with the mechanical efficiency of a frequent flyer. Blazer off, belt off, laptop out, liquids out, shoes off. I placed my leather belt in the bin, coiling it neatly like a sleeping snake. It looked innocent there, just a strip of black leather and a silver buckle, a mundane object in a mundane setting. I pushed my bins onto the rollers and watched them disappear into the maw of the X-ray machine. I stepped toward the body scanner, the large glass cylinder that always made me feel like a specimen in a science fiction movie. The TSA agent, a woman with tired eyes and a badge that hung crookedly on her shirt, waved me forward. "Raise your hands above your head," she droned. A script she had likely repeated 500 times before sunrise. I stepped inside. I placed my feet on the yellow footprints. I raised my hands. I held my breath. Though I knew it did not matter. The machine whirred. A 2-second burst of invisible waves scanning for anomalies. "Step out," the agent said. I stepped out on the other side, expecting the usual nod, the signal to collect my belongings and sprint to gate B12. I was already calculating the run time. If I power walked, I could make it to the gate just as boarding for Group 3 began. I reached for my bins. My eyes locked on the conveyor belt where my laptop was emerging. "Ma'am," the voice did not come from the tired woman at the scanner. It came from my left. It was deep, authoritative, and cold. I turned. A police officer stood there. He was not TSA. He was airport police, dressed in a dark uniform that absorbed the harsh fluorescent light. He was tall, blocking the exit from the checkpoint like a human bollard. His face was unreadable, his jaw set in a line of professional indifference. Behind him stood another officer, his hand resting casually near his belt. "Excuse me?" I asked. My voice remained steady, but my pulse hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Ma'am, come with us," the first officer said. It was not a request. It was a command wrapped in the thinnest layer of civility. I frowned, confusion warring with a sudden, icy spike of adrenaline. "Why?" "I have a flight to catch. My boarding starts in 10 minutes. We need to speak with you privately," he said. "Step this way. Please, do not make a scene." The world around me seemed to tilt on its axis. The ambient noise of the terminal, the rolling suitcases, the announcements over the intercom, the chatter of families, seemed to drop away, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence in my immediate vicinity. The people in line behind me, the ones who had been grumbling about the wait times just seconds ago, went quiet. I could feel their eyes on me, dozens of pairs of eyes, burning into my back. They were looking at me with that specific mix of curiosity and judgment reserved for public disturbances. They were wondering what I had done. Was I a smuggler? Was I drunk? Did I have a weapon? I could see the narrative forming in their heads. To them, I was no longer a fellow traveler. I was a disruption. I was someone who had fallen into the hole, and they were all craning their necks to watch me hit the bottom. I felt a wave of isolation wash over me, cold and absolute. Just 30 seconds ago, I was part of the herd. Now, because of one sentence from a man in a uniform, I was a pariah. I took a breath. I forced my shoulders to relax. I knew, with the clarity of someone who deals with regulations for a living, that reacting with anger was the fastest way to miss my flight. If I raised my voice, if I argued, if I showed even a flicker of the panic that was clawing at my throat, they would escalate this. "I am complying," I said, my voice low and even. "I am just grabbing my shoes." "Leave the bins," the second officer said. "We will bring them." I stood there in my socks on the cold tile floor. I felt stripped, vulnerable. I walked where they pointed, away from the flow of passengers, away from the gates, away from the freedom of the concourse. We walked past the staring crowd. I kept my head high, refusing to look at the floor, refusing to look like a criminal. I fixed my eyes on the exit sign in the distance, trying to project an aura of misunderstood innocence. They led me to a small room situated just to the side of the checkpoint. It was a glass-walled enclosure, transparent enough that everyone passing by could see inside, but soundproof enough that my defense would be unheard. The room was a masterclass in intimidation design. The walls were gray, the light was too bright, buzzing with a headache-inducing frequency. There was a metal table and 2 chairs that were bolted to the floor. "Sit down, Ms. Richardson," the first officer said. I sat. The metal chair was cold through my trousers. I looked at the 2 men. They loomed over the table, using their height and the confined space to exert dominance. "I need to see some identification," the officer said. I reached into my bag, moving in slow motion. I used 2 fingers to pinch the corner of my driver's license, pulling it out with deliberate, non-threatening movements. I knew the drill. Sudden movements made them nervous. Nervous cops made mistakes. I could not afford a mistake. I placed the plastic card on the metal table and slid it forward. "My name is Parker Richardson," I said. "I am traveling to Durango via Denver for a legal proceeding. I have no criminal record. I have no contraband in my luggage. I would like to know why I am being detained." My voice sounded strange in the small room. too loud and yet suffocatingly close. I was channeling every ounce of professionalism I possessed. I was trying to sound like the project manager who negotiates with city councils, not the terrified daughter who was watching her grandfather's legacy slip away with every ticking second. The officer did not answer immediately. He picked up my ID and scrutinized it, comparing the photo to my face. He looked at me, his eyes searching for a crack in my composure. I stared back, blinking slowly. I was not going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me tremble. I was standing straight, even while sitting down. The second officer pulled a tablet from his belt. He tapped the screen a few times, the blue light reflecting off his face. He scrolled through a document, his lips moving slightly as he read. "We received a report this morning." The officer with the tablet said. He did not look up at me. He kept his eyes glued to the screen, as if the truth resided in the digital pixels rather than the human woman sitting 3 feet away from him. "A report?" I asked. "What kind of report?" "A report regarding a potential security risk," he said. He finally looked up. His expression was grave. "The kind of look one gives to a ticking bomb. The system flagged you. The report states that you made specific verbal threats regarding airport security and that you are in an unstable state of mind." I stared at him. The words did not make sense. Verbal threats? Unstable? I had barely spoken to anyone since I left my apartment. I had ordered a coffee with a nod and a thank you. I had thanked the Uber driver. I had not threatened a soul. "Who filed this report?" I asked. The question came out sharper than I intended. "We cannot disclose that information at this stage," the first officer said. "But the report indicates that you are a threat to the safety of this flight and the passengers on board." I looked at the clock on the wall behind them. It was 6:20 in the morning. My flight was boarding in 10 minutes. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was not a random screening. This was not a computer glitch. This was a precision strike. My parents knew my flight details. I had emailed the itinerary to the family lawyer days ago. Assuming it was safe, my father knew exactly when I would be at security. He knew exactly what to say to trigger a response that would bypass common sense and go straight to protocol. "I am not a threat," I said. Leaning forward, my hands were flat on the table. "I am a woman trying to get to a probate court hearing. If I miss this flight, I miss the hearing. That is the only threat happening here." The officer with the tablet swiped to a new screen. He turned the device around so I could see it. Though he kept a firm grip on the edges, the report is quite detailed. "Ma'am," he said, "it claims you have been making erratic statements about bringing down the system and that you vowed to make people pay." The words hung in the air, grotesque and absurd. Bring down the system, make people pay. They were phrases lifted from a bad action movie, or perhaps from a frantic, tearful argument I might have had with my mother weeks ago about the fairness of the will. But taken out of context, stripped of the emotional reality of a grieving granddaughter, and pasted into a law enforcement database, they sounded like terrorism. I looked at the officers. I saw the hesitation in their eyes. They were not sure. They were following a script, reacting to keywords that had been fed into a machine. But the woman in front of them did not match the profile on the screen. I was dressed in a business suit. I was calm. I was articulate. But doubt takes time to resolve, and time was the one thing I did not have. "I need you to look at the source of that report," I said. I felt a cold anger crystallization in my chest. It was a sharp, jagged thing, but it gave me focus. "I know you have a name on that screen. I know you have a caller ID or a reporting party listed." The officer pulled the tablet back. "We are investigating the credibility of the threat." He said, "You are not investigating." I said, "You are stalling, and while you stall, my gate is going to close." I looked through the glass wall. I could see the passengers walking freely toward their destinations. I saw a family with 2 young children laughing as they ran toward the tram. I saw business travelers checking their phones. They were all moving forward. I was stuck in a glass box, pinned down by a lie that had been launched from 1,000 miles away. The officer sighed. He looked at his partner. There was a silent communication between them, a moment of shared uncertainty. The partner shrugged slightly. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice dropping an octave. "We have a duty to investigate all threats. The report claims you have a history of emergency calls that are concerning." "A history of emergency calls?" I repeated. "I have never called 911 in my life. The report says otherwise." He said, "Show me." I said. He hesitated. "Show me the log." I demanded. "If I am a threat, show me the evidence. If I am unstable, play the audio. You have the ability to verify this right now. You have the access." I was gambling. I was gambling that their curiosity would outweigh their adherence to the red tape. I was gambling that the discrepancy between the polished professional in the chair and the maniac in the report was too large for them to ignore. The officer with the tablet looked at me for a long beat. Then, he tapped the screen. He opened a file. He pressed a button. A voice filled the small room. It was tinny, distorted by the recording software, but it was unmistakable. It was a voice I had heard my entire life. It was a voice that used to read me bedtime stories. A voice that had taught me how to ride a bike. But now, the tone was different. It was breathless, trembling with a performance of concern that was Oscar-worthy. "Officer, please, you have to help. My daughter. She is not well. She is at the airport. She said she was going to make them listen. She said she was going to explode if they did not listen. I am terrified for the public." The recording stopped. The silence in the room was deafening. The officer looked at the tablet, then he looked at me. Then he looked at the field labeled reporting party. The name was there, bright and damning in the high-contrast display. Bryce Richardson. Relationship. Father. I looked at the officer. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me. This was not about safety. This was not about security. This was a weaponization of love, or what passed for it in my family. My father had used the airport police as his personal pawns to win a civil dispute. I checked my watch. 6:30. My plane was boarding. The officer looked at his partner again. The dynamic in the room shifted. The hostility evaporated, replaced by a confused awkwardness. They realized they were standing in the middle of something that had nothing to do with airplanes and everything to do with a broken home. But realization is not a release. "We still have to process the report," the officer said. Though his voice lacked the earlier conviction, "We have to clear you. Process it fast." I said, "Because if I miss this flight, the person who made that call is going to win, and you are going to be the ones who helped him." The officer tapped the screen again, but before he could speak, before he could tell me that I was free to go, my phone buzzed on the table. It lit up with a notification from the airline. I looked down. The message was short. It was brutal. "Your flight has been canceled per customer request." I froze. I stared at the screen. The officers stared at me. It was not just the police. It was the airline. It was the court. It was a coordinated, multi-front assault on my presence. My parents were not just trying to stop me. They were trying to erase me. They were using the infrastructure of the modern world, the security checks, the customer service lines, the scheduling algorithms, to delete me from the story. I looked up at the officers. My father just canceled my ticket. I said. The officer blinked. He did not know what to say. There is no protocol for this in the handbook. There is no chapter on what to do when a father swatting his own daughter is also hacking her travel plans. I stood up. I did not ask for permission. I grabbed my ID from the table. "I am going to the gate," I said. "Ma'am, you are not cleared yet," the officer warned, stepping forward. "Then arrest me." I said, "Put the handcuffs on. Drag me through the terminal. Make a scene. Because that report you are holding, it is a lie. And if you keep me here 1 second longer, you are complicit in fraud." I held his gaze. I was betting everything on his doubt. I was betting that he did not want to be the guy who arrested a woman for trying to go to her grandfather's probate hearing. He hesitated. He looked at the tablet, then at the door, then at me. "Go," he said quietly. "But do not run." I did not run. Running implies guilt. Running makes people nervous. I walked out of the glass box, past the staring faces of the other passengers. Past the checkpoint, I walked with the purpose of a woman who knows exactly where she is going, even if the road beneath her feet is crumbling. I was Parker Richardson. I was alone. I was targeted. And I was going to Durango, even if I had to tear the sky open to get there. The glass room was colder than the terminal. It was a sterile cold, the kind designed to lower your body temperature and your resolve simultaneously. I sat on the metal chair, my hands clasped on the table, watching the two officers. They were not looking at me. They were looking at their tablet, scrolling through a digital report that contained the fictional version of my life. The officer on the left, the one with the chevron on his sleeve, finally looked up. He did not blink. He recited the accusation with the flat, monotone delivery of a man reading a grocery list, which made the words sound even more grotesque. The report states that you made specific comments about the airport infrastructure. He said, you were overheard saying that you would make them pay. It also states you alluded to a coming incident that would disrupt operations. I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. Make them pay. It was such a lazy, melodramatic line of dialogue. It sounded like something ripped from a low-budget thriller. The kind of vague, menacing statement that means nothing but triggers every red flag in the Department of Homeland Security's algorithm. It was brilliantly designed. It was specific enough to warrant detention, but vague enough that my father could later claim he had just misheard me if pressed under oath. I did not say that. I said, my voice was level. I did not raise it. In a room like this, volume is interpreted as guilt. Silence is interpreted as calculation. I had to walk the razor-thin line in between. The officer ignored my denial. The reporting party claims you were agitated, that you were making erratic movements and speaking to yourself about destruction. I leaned forward about 2 inches, just enough to engage, not enough to threaten. Who reported this? I asked. The officer paused. We cannot say. That silence was a heavy thing. It hung in the air between us. Thick with bureaucracy, the phrase cannot say is usually police code for we are protecting a source. But in this context, it felt different. It felt like they were protecting a narrative. They knew, on some level, that the source mattered more than the content. But their protocol demanded they treat the threat as real until proven otherwise. And that protocol was eating up my time. I checked the wall clock. The second hand was sweeping past the 6. Every tick was a dollar sign falling out of my grandfather's estate. Every tick was a victory for the people who wanted me in this room. I took a breath and decided to dismantle their assumption, not with emotion, but with geography and logic. I am Parker Richardson, I said, enunciating every syllable. I am currently en route to La Plata County for a probate hearing regarding the estate of Everett Mallory. That hearing starts at 9 o'clock this morning. If I am not in the courtroom when the docket is called, the opposing party, my parents, will be granted temporary control of the assets by default. I watched their eyes. The mention of a probate hearing made them blink. It was too mundane. Terrorists do not usually have tight schedules involving civil court litigation. I continued, pressing the advantage. The person who called you knows this. They are using you as a delay tactic. They do not need me arrested. They just need me here, in this chair, for 45 minutes. That is all it takes to win. The second officer, the one holding the tablet, frowned. He tapped the screen, his brow furrowing as he looked at a new section of the report. It says here the caller claims you have a history, he said slowly. A history of emergency calls, concerning behavior, mental instability. I felt a cold spike in my chest. This was the second layer of the trap. If the bomb threat did not stick, the mental health hold would. My father knew that if he painted me as hysterical, the police could detain me for a 72-hour observation period. That would not just make me miss the hearing, it would discredit my testimony forever. She cannot be the executor. Look at the police report. She was hospitalized for instability. That is a lie. I said, it came out sharper than I intended. The officer looked skeptical. We have to take these reports seriously. Ma'am, I pointed at the tablet. If I have a history of emergency calls, it would be in the system. Verify it. The officer hesitated. He looked at his partner. There was a reluctance there, the inertia of a system that prefers to process paperwork rather than investigate it. "We do not have access to your full medical history here." The partner said, "I am not asking for medical history." I said, "I am asking for the call log of the person who reported me." They stopped. "If that report came from a credible source," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "then they would have stayed on the line. They would be identifiable. But if I am right, and I am, that report came from a family member who is currently trying to stop me from getting on a plane. Open the raw call log. Look at the metadata." The officer holding the tablet looked uncomfortable. "That is not standard procedure for a field interview." I slammed my hand flat on the table. The metallic thud made both of them jump. "It becomes standard procedure when you are being used as accomplices in a civil fraud scheme." I said, "Open the audio file. Play the call. If I am the monster you say I am, let me hear the accusation." The room went silent again. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to get louder. The officer looked at me, really looked at me, and saw not a threat, but a woman who was desperate for the truth. He looked down at the tablet. He swiped up. He tapped a few keys to bypass the summary screen and access the raw dispatch data. I watched his face. I saw the moment the data hit him. His eyes widened slightly. He tilted the screen toward his partner. "What is that?" the partner asked. "Look at the timestamps," the officer said. He turned the tablet around and slid it across the metal table toward me. I looked down. The screen was black with white text, a list of digital footprints that my father thought would never be seen. There were 3 calls listed from the same number. 6:02 in the morning. Duration, 4 seconds. 6:04 in the morning. Duration, 6 seconds. 6:08 in the morning. Duration, 2 minutes and 15 seconds. I pointed at the first 2 entries. He hung up. I said, the realization was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. He called 911, and then he panicked. He hung up. Then he called back 2 minutes later. He started to speak, didn't like how he sounded, and hung up again. I looked up at the officers. He was rehearsing. I said, he was practicing his voice. He needed to sound scared enough to get a response, but calm enough to be credible. Who rehearses a desperate emergency call? The officers were silent. The narrative of the concerned citizen was crumbling right in front of them. A man watching a woman threaten an airport does not call, hang up, wait 2 minutes, call, hang up, and then call again 4 minutes later. A man reading a script does that. Who is the reporting party? I asked, though I already knew. The officer tapped the screen again. The field for reporting party expanded. Bryce Richardson. Relationship. Father. The officer looked at me. His face had changed. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by a look of mild disgust. He realized he had been played. He realized that the uniform he wore, the authority he carried, had been weaponized by a man in North Carolina to control a woman in an airport. "Play it," I said. The officer pressed the play button. The audio was crackly, filled with the static of a cell phone connection, but the voice was crystal clear. It was my father, but it was a version of my father I had never heard before. It was breathless. It was trembling. It was a performance. "Officer, please, I do not know who else to call." Pause. A breath. "My daughter. Parker. She is at the airport. She is not well. She has been off her medication. She told me. God. She told me she was going to make them all listen." I sat there, stone-faced, listening to him invent a mental illness for me. I have never taken medication for anything other than seasonal allergies. "I am terrified for the public," the voice continued. "She is unpredictable. You have to stop her." And then, the slip, the fatal error, the detail that he could not help but include because it was the only thing he actually cared about. "She is trying to get to a hearing," he said, "an inheritance hearing. She is not in a state to be in court. Please, detain her for her own safety." The recording ended with a click. The silence that followed was different than the silence before. It was not the silence of suspicion, it was the silence of shared embarrassment. One of the officers exhaled a long breath through his nose. He looked at the tablet, then at me. He mentioned the court hearing. The officer said quietly, "Yes." I said, "He did. Why would a man worried about a bomb threat mention a probate court date?" The officer did not answer. He did not have to. The answer was obvious. A man worried about a bomb talks about bombs. A man worried about money talks about court. "This is not a security issue," the partner said, leaning back in his chair. "This is a domestic dispute." "No," I corrected him. "Domestic disputes happen at home. This is a false police report filed to interfere with a federal judicial proceeding, and you two are the instrument he used to do it." I saw the shift in their posture. They were no longer guarding me. They were now calculating their own liability. They had detained a passenger based on a report that was demonstrably false, filed by a man who had left a digital trail of his own rehearsal. I reached for the tablet, but the officer pulled it back. "We need to document this." He said, "You need to do more than document it." I said, "I want that audio preserved. I want those call logs preserved. And I want the incident number." The officer looked at the clock. "You are going to miss your flight," he said. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I am not going to miss it." I said, "Because you are going to escort me to the gate. You are going to walk me through that terminal so that no one stops me again. And while we walk, you are going to make sure that this incident report reflects exactly what just happened here." I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. Just a little. Not from fear, from rage. My father had tried to use the system to crush me, but he had forgotten that the system leaves footprints. He had forgotten that digital logs do not lie, even if fathers do. He had tried to paint me as unstable. Instead, he had just handed me the first piece of evidence I would use to bury him. "Let's go," the officer said. He stood up and opened the door. The air outside the glass room felt different now. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a battlefield. And for the first time since I walked into the airport, I felt like I had a weapon. The officer slid a clipboard across the metal table, the sound of the clip scraping against the surface echoing in the small room. It was a voluntary statement form, a piece of paper that looked bureaucratic and dull, but felt like a lifeline. "Write it down," he said, his voice softer now, lacking the edge of command it held 10 minutes ago. "Everything you just told us, that you deny the threat, that the reporting party is a family member involved in a legal dispute, that you request the preservation of all audio and call logs related to this incident." I took the pen. My hand was steady, a fact that surprised me given the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I wrote with precision. I did not use emotional language. I used the language of contracts and liability, the language I spoke every day in my job. I, Parker Richardson, was detained at Security Checkpoint B due to a false report filed by Bryce Richardson. I deny all allegations of threats against airport infrastructure. I am currently traveling to a probate hearing in La Plata County, Colorado, where the reporting party is the opposing litigant. I request that the call logs, audio recordings, and officer body camera footage from this interaction be preserved as evidence of malicious interference with a judicial proceeding. I signed my name at the bottom. The ink was dark and permanent. The officer took the clipboard back. He tore off a yellow carbon copy and handed it to me, along with a small card containing a string of numbers. "Keep this incident number," he said, tapping the card with his index finger. "This is your shield. If anyone claims you were arrested today, or if anyone says you were removed from the airport in handcuffs, this piece of paper proves them wrong. It shows you were stopped, questioned, and cleared. It shows no charges were filed." I tucked the paper into my internal blazer pocket, right next to my heart. It felt heavier than paper should. It felt like ammunition. "Wait," the second officer said. He was looking at the tablet again, scrolling down to the bottom of the report. "There is one more thing. The reporting party mentioned you might be carrying specific documents." I froze. "He claims you have probate documents in your possession." The officer continued, reading from the screen. "He claims you might try to destroy them or that they are stolen property. He suggested we check your bag for sensitive legal files. I almost laughed. It was so transparent. My father did not think I had a bomb. He knew I had the evidence. He wanted the police to open my bag, find the papers, and confiscate them as part of an investigation. He wanted to separate me from the one thing that could prove he was lying about the night my grandfather died. I do have documents, I said calmly. I have a single folder. It contains a printout of the computer-aided dispatch summary from the night Everett Mallory passed away. The officers looked at each other. Dispatch summary? It is a public record, I explained. It is the log of the ambulance and police response to my grandfather's home. Why is that important? The first officer asked. Why would your father want us to take that? I looked him in the eye, because they are arguing in court that my grandfather was incapacitated when he changed his will. I said, they claim they were with him, caring for him, when he made those decisions. But that document lists the names of the people present when the paramedics arrived. It shows who was actually there, and more importantly, who was not. The officer nodded slowly. He understood. This wasn't about safety. It was about suppression. You are good to go, he said. They stood up. I expected them to point to the door and let me walk out alone, but they didn't. They flanked me. We will walk you back, the first officer said. Just in case. We walked out of the glass room and back toward the checkpoint. Having two uniformed officers escorting me should have felt intimidating, but in that moment, they felt like a firewall. They were a physical barrier preventing any further staged drama. If my father had hired someone to cause a scene, or if he called back to claim I was running away, these two men were the living proof that I was compliant. I collected my things from the bins. My laptop was cold. My shoes were still untied. I slipped them on quickly, refusing to fumble. I grabbed the handle of my carry-on. Thank you, I said to the officers. Good luck in court, one of them muttered. I turned and walked into the terminal. My instinct was to run. My body wanted to sprint, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that interrogation room, but I forced my legs to move at a measured pace. Running is what guilty people do. Running is what hysterical people do. Running is the B-roll footage they use on the news to show a suspect fleeing the scene. I walked with a long, purposeful stride. I checked the departure screens. My gait had changed. Of course it had. It had moved from B12 to C4. A solid 10-minute walk away. It felt fitting. The airport itself seemed to be conspiring to make this difficult, as if the building had been paid off to be an extra in my parents' drama. I was halfway to Concourse C when my phone vibrated in my hand. It was not a text message. It was an email notification from the airline. I stopped in the middle of the moving walkway, causing a businessman behind me to huff in annoyance. I opened the email. The subject line was red. Flight status update. Cancelled. I read the body of the email, and the air left my lungs. Your itinerary has been cancelled per customer request. A refund has been issued to the original form of payment. I stared at the screen. The police officer had let me go, but my father had not. While I was in that glass room proving I wasn't a terrorist, he had called the airline. He had used my confirmation code, answered the security questions he likely knew the answers to, my mother's maiden name, my first pet, and canceled my seat. I looked up at the gate sign ahead. C4. The plane was there. The jet bridge was connected. The pilots were probably going through their pre-flight checks, but I no longer had a ticket to get on board. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. It was a clean, digital assassination. No blood, no weapon, just a few keystrokes and a phone call to customer service. He had stranded me in Charlotte, 2,000 miles from the courtroom where my grandfather's wishes were about to be buried. I stepped off the moving walkway. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone. I simply tightened my grip on my suitcase until my fingers ached. They wanted me to give up. They wanted me to look at this canceled ticket, cry in defeat, and go home. They wanted me to call them and ask for forgiveness. I looked at the time. I had 20 minutes before the doors closed. I am not going home. I whispered to the busy terminal. I turned and headed straight for the customer service desk, my heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic beat against the floor. I was going to get on a plane today, even if I had to buy a new ticket, even if I had to fly cargo, even if I had to tell the airline agent exactly what kind of man Bryce Richardson really was. My father thought he had canceled my flight. All he had really done was ensure that when I finally arrived, I would be bringing a storm with me. The customer service line for the airline was a winding river of frustration, populated by stranded travelers and exhausted families. But I did not join the back of the queue. I could not afford the luxury of waiting my turn. The digital clock above the desk read 6:45 in the morning. My flight, or rather the flight I had been kicked off of, was scheduled to push back in 15 minutes. Calling the hotline was out of the question. I knew that hellscape intimately. I would be trapped in a labyrinth of automated menus, listening to smooth jazz and a robotic voice apologizing for higher-than-expected call volumes. While my plane taxied to the runway without me, the hotline was a black hole that swallowed the one resource I had completely run out of, which was time. I walked straight to the first-class priority lane. I was not flying first class. I was flying economy, in a middle seat, if I was lucky. But I had the distinct air of a woman who was about to dismantle a corporation if she did not get an answer. And sometimes, that is enough to bypass the velvet rope. The agent behind the counter was a young man with perfectly gelled hair and a name tag that read, Kevin. He looked up, startled by my sudden appearance at his podium. I need you to pull up my reservation immediately. I said. I did not say hello. I did not ask how his morning was. I slapped my driver's license onto the counter with enough force to make his stapler jump. My name is Parker Richardson. I just received an email stating my flight to Denver was canceled by customer request. I am the customer. I made no such request. Kevin blinked, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. He looked at me, then at the license, then back at me. He seemed to be assessing whether I was a Karen he needed to manage or a genuine emergency he needed to solve. Ma'am, if the booking was canceled, look at the timestamp. I interrupted. It was canceled 12 minutes ago. I was in police custody at the security checkpoint when that happened, unless I have telepathic powers. I did not call your airline, he typed. The sound of his keystrokes was maddeningly slow, a click-clack rhythm that felt like a countdown. He frowned at his screen. I see the cancellation here, Kevin said, his voice taking on that defensive, bureaucratic tone that employees use when they suspect a system error but do not want to admit it. It was processed through our central reservation system. The caller verified the account. Verified how? I demanded. They provided the confirmation code and answered the security questions on file. He said, I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. Security questions: mother's maiden name, name of your first pet, the street you grew up on. For most people, these are safeguards against identity theft. For me, they were open doors. My parents did not need to be hackers to break into my life. They just needed to be my parents. They knew every answer because they were the ones who had bought the pet and lived on the street. I did not authorize anyone to access my account. I said, my voice low and dangerous. Who made the call? I cannot give out that information due to privacy policies, Kevin said automatically. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the yellow slip of paper the police officer had given me. The incident number was scrawled in blue ink, a jagged set of digits that represented my innocence. I placed it on the counter, right on top of my license. It looked stark and official against the pristine white surface. This is a police incident number from the airport authority. I said, I was just detained because the same person who canceled this flight filed a false domestic terrorism report against me to stop me from getting on that plane. This is not a customer service dispute. Kevin, this is witness tampering and interference with a federal court case. If you hide the identity of the caller behind a privacy policy, you are becoming an accessory to that crime. Kevin stopped typing. He looked at the yellow paper. He looked at the desperation and the fury in my eyes. He realized that this was above his pay grade, but also that calling a manager would take 20 minutes I did not have. He made a choice. He typed a command. The printer behind him whirred to life. I can print the internal notes attached to the ticket history. he said quietly. But I cannot officially tell you who it was. I understand. I said. He handed me a flimsy piece of thermal paper. I snatched it up. The text was blocky and faint, but legible. Action. PNR canceled. Refund to Visa. Ending in 4099. Caller ID. Bryce Richardson. Notes. Caller stated passenger is not safe to travel alone due to medical episode. Requested full cancellation for passenger safety. I stared at the paper. The phrasing was almost identical to what he had told the police. Not safe. Medical episode. Passenger safety. He was using the same script on 2 different stages. To the police, I was a threat to the airport. To the airline, I was a threat to myself. He was painting a portrait of a woman in the middle of a breakdown, and he was doing it so convincingly that the world was bending to his will. He is trying to ground me. I whispered. He refunded the ticket, Kevin said, pointing to the line on the paper. The money goes back to the card. That means you do not have a valid ticket anymore, and the flight is fully booked. I looked at the screen behind him. The flight status showed, boarding. Get me on that plane. I said, I can't, he said. It is full. We have standby passengers already clearing. Then get me on the next one. I said, I do not care what it costs. Get me to Denver, and from Denver to Durango. He typed furiously. I watched his eyes scan the rows of data. I have 1 seat on the 8:30 departure to Denver, he said. It connects to a regional flight arriving in Durango at 1 in the afternoon. 1 in the afternoon. The hearing was at 9 in the morning, but the judge had pushed it back. If I got there by 1, I could still make it to the courthouse before the end of the business day. I could still walk into that room and present the evidence before the final stamp hit the paper. I will take it. I said, it is a full-fare economy ticket, he warned. Since it is last minute, the price is... I pulled out my credit card. It was a heavy metal card, one I used for business expenses. Charge it. I said, I do not care if it is $2,000. Just book it. He swiped the card. The machine beeped. Approval. Now, I said, leaning over the counter as the printer churned out my new boarding pass. We are going to lock this account down. I want you to put a flag on my profile. A fraud alert. I can add a note. Kevin said, no, not a note. A blockade. I want you to write that no changes can be made to this itinerary over the phone. None. 0. Any changes must be made in person, with a government-issued photo ID at the airport counter. If the Pope calls you with my confirmation code, you hang up. Do you understand? He nodded, typing the instructions into the system. Verification required. In person only. And one more thing. I said, how did he get in? I changed my passwords last week. Kevin frowned. He clicked through a few tabs on his screen, digging into the history of my frequent flyer profile. It looks like an authorized contact was added to your profile 3 days ago. He said, 3 days ago? That was right after I had emailed the lawyer. Who? I asked. It is listed as an alternate email address for account recovery. He said, parker.richardson.92@yahoo.com. I felt the blood drain from my face. That was my college email address. I hadn't used it in a decade. I had likely set it up during my freshman year for signing up for student discounts and newsletters. I had forgotten it even existed, but my parents hadn't. They must have remembered it or found it in old paperwork in the attic. They had used the forgot password feature, sent the reset link to that dormant account, and gained a backdoor into my entire digital life. They didn't break in with brute force. They walked in through a door I had left unlocked 10 years ago. Remove it, I said, my voice shaking. Delete it, and delete any other email that isn't my work address. Kevin hit the delete key. It is gone, he said. He handed me the new boarding pass. It felt warm in my hand. It was just a piece of paper with a QR code and a seat assignment. Row 32B. The very last row, right by the lavatory. But to me, it was a declaration of war. Thank you. Kevin, I said. I turned away from the counter. The terminal was bustling. People were rushing to their vacations, to their business meetings, to their lovers. They were oblivious to the invisible war being fought in the data streams above their heads. I looked at my phone. I had a new notification. It was a text message. Mom. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to delete it unread, but I needed to know the temperature of the enemy. I tapped the screen. Turn around. Parker, you are only going to hurt yourself. We are doing this for you. You will regret it if you come. There were no exclamation points, no angry emojis. It was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a mother who truly believes that controlling her adult daughter is an act of love. She framed her threat as advice. She wrapped her malice in concern. You will regret it. It implied that the pain I would face was inevitable. A force of nature, rather than something she and my father were actively manufacturing. I looked at the boarding pass in my hand. Then I looked at the police incident report in my pocket. And finally, the internal airline notes I had just acquired. 3 pieces of paper. They had tried to stop me with paper. They had filed reports, canceled tickets, and submitted motions. They thought that if they created enough bureaucratic friction, I would burn out. They thought I would crumble under the weight of the logistics. But they had made a critical error. They assumed I was still the child they could send to her room. They forgot that I was a project manager. I dealt with friction for a living. I dealt with obstacles and delays and budget cuts, and I always delivered. I started walking toward the security checkpoint again. This time, I had a new ticket and a new resolve. I am not going to regret this. I typed back. I hit send. Then I powered off my phone. I did not want to see their reply. I did not want to give them another second of access to my mind. I walked onto the jet bridge, the metal tunnel echoing with the sound of my footsteps. The air smelled of jet fuel and recycled oxygen. They wanted me to disappear. They wanted the court to see an empty chair and assume I didn't care. They wanted to erase me with paperwork. Fine. I would make sure that when I landed, I had enough paperwork to bury them. I was going to turn every lie, every canceled flight, and every fake police report into a brick. And I was going to build a wall around my grandfather's legacy that they could never climb over. I stepped onto the plane, found my seat in the back row, and buckled the belt. The click of the metal latch sounded like a gun being cocked. The moment the plane leveled off at 30,000 feet, the seatbelt sign pinged off. I did not relax. I did not recline my seat. I reached into the seat back pocket, retrieved the safety card to create a flat surface on my tray table, and pulled out my credit card. The airline Wi-Fi cost $25 for the duration of the flight. I would have paid $2,500. I typed in the numbers with the speed of a stenographer, connected to the slow, pulsing network, and watched my inbox refresh. It was waiting for me. A notification from the La Plata County Court electronic filing system. Notice of rescheduling. Estate of Everett Mallory. I clicked it open. The hearing, originally slotted for the afternoon docket to accommodate my travel, a courtesy the court had extended weeks ago, had been moved. It was now scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning. I looked at my watch. It was 8:15. This was not a scheduling conflict. This was a tactical strike. My parents knew I was in the air. They knew I was trapped in a metal tube without the ability to walk into a courtroom. They had moved the hearing up by 2 hours to ensure that by the time my wheels touched the tarmac in Colorado, the gavel would have already banged, and the assets would be theirs. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, not to listen to music, but to drown out the crying baby in row 31. I activated Wi-Fi calling. I prayed the bandwidth would hold. I dialed the number for the clerk of the probate court, a number I had memorized weeks ago. It rang once, twice, probate clerk. A voice answered. It was dry, efficient, the voice of a woman buried under mountains of paper. "This is Parker Richardson," I said, pitching my voice to be heard over the drone of the engines but low enough not to alert the flight attendant. "I am a party in the Mallory estate case, number 24PR109. I just received a notification that my hearing was moved to 10 o'clock. There was the sound of typing on the other end. Yes, Ms. Richardson." The clerk said, "An emergency motion for accommodation was filed by the petitioners 30 minutes ago. Judge Hargrove granted the expedited slot. On what grounds? I asked. My hand gripped the phone so hard the edges dug into my palm. The clerk hesitated. The public record indicates that the petitioners claim you are unable to attend due to being detained by law enforcement. I closed my eyes. Of course. It was a perfect circle of lies. My father calls the police to get me detained. Then he calls the court to say I am detained. He uses the crisis he manufactured as the evidence to exclude me from the process. What exactly does the motion say? I asked. It states that you are currently in custody at Charlotte Douglas International Airport following a security incident involving threats to public safety. The clerk read, "The petitioners are requesting to proceed ex parte, without you, to appoint a temporary administrator to secure the estate assets immediately. They were not just trying to win, they were trying to loot the house before I could even get the key. I am not in custody," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I am on a commercial flight to Denver." I was stopped, questioned, and released without charge because the report was false. I cannot take testimony over the phone. The clerk said, her tone dismissing me, "You need to file a motion." "I do not have time to file a motion." I said, "The hearing is in less than 2 hours. If you let them proceed based on a lie, the court is being defrauded. I need to submit exhibits for the judge's in-chambers review. Right now." There was a long pause. I could hear the clerk weighing the risk. On one hand, breaking protocol. On the other, facilitating a fraud. "I cannot file them for you," she said finally, "but I can give you the secure email address for the judicial assistant. If you send it now, she might see it before the judge takes the bench. Give it to me," I said. She recited the address. I typed it into a new email draft. Subject: urgent/case24-PR-109/proof of interference. I did not write a long, emotional plea. Judges do not read novels. They read evidence. I laid out 3 attachments. Exhibit A, a photo of the yellow police incident slip. I cropped it to highlight the incident number and the lack of any arrest code. I added a caption: "Stopped, identified, cleared. No arrest." Exhibit B, a scan of the thermal paper from the airline counter. I circled the line that read, "Caller ID, Bryce Richardson," and the note, "Caller requested cancellation for passenger safety." I added a caption: "Petitioner impersonated a medical contact to cancel beneficiary's travel." Exhibit C, a screenshot of the text message my mother had sent me 10 minutes ago. "Turn around. You will regret it." I added a caption: "Threat of coercion, disguised as concern." I hit send. The progress bar crawled across the screen. Fighting the slow satellite connection, I watched it inch forward. 10%, 50%, 90%. Sent. I did not stop. I switched apps and dialed a new number. This one belonged to Sloan Mercer. Mercer was the court-appointed attorney for the estate. She was not my lawyer, and she was not my parents' lawyer. She represented the interests of my dead grandfather. I had only spoken to her once, and she had been terrifyingly brief. She was a woman who billed in 6-minute increments and had zero tolerance for family drama. "This is Mercer," she answered. "No hello, no pleasantries. It is Parker Richardson." I said, "I am on a plane. The hearing has been moved up. My parents are trying to lock me out." "I know," Mercer said. Her voice was sharp, like the crack of a whip. "I just got the notice. Your father's lawyer is claiming you are a danger to yourself and others. They are asking for emergency temporary letters of administration. They want control of the bank accounts and the safe deposit box by noon today. You cannot let them get it." I said, "I cannot stop a judge from ruling if the other side is the only one in the room." Mercer said, "Unless you have something better than 'my dad is mean.' Parker, I need facts. They are painting you as unstable. If I walk in there and say, 'She says she is sane,' I lose. I sent the clerk proof that the airport arrest was a hoax." I said, "But I have something else. Something for the will contest itself." "What?" Mercer asked. "My parents are basing their entire challenge on the claim that my grandfather lacked capacity when he changed his will." I said, "They claim they were with him the night he died. They claim they were the ones who called 911. that they were managing his care, and that he was confused and disoriented in his final hours. That is their affidavit. Mercer confirmed. They swore they were at the bedside. I pulled down the tray table. I opened the folder I had guarded with my life. Inside was the computer-aided dispatch summary, the CAD report, from the night of the emergency. I had requested it from the county records department weeks ago. Acting on a hunch, I smoothed the paper out. The cabin was dim, but the reading light cast a harsh spotlight on the document. I am looking at the dispatch log from that night. I said, "Read it to me," Mercer commanded. I scanned the lines, the timestamps, the unit numbers. And then, the notes entered by the dispatcher as the ambulance arrived. Unit 412 on scene at 2300 hours. Notes: house dark, front door locked, forced entry required. I read that out loud. Mercer was silent. "Keep going," she said. I moved my finger down to the next line. Patient located in master bedroom, unconscious. And then, the line that changed everything. The line that turned my parents' story from a lie into perjury. Notes: caller not on scene. Neighbor, Unit 2B, met responders outside. Caller advised they were monitoring via remote camera system. I felt the breath catch in my throat. They were not there. I whispered, "What did you say?" Mercer asked. They were not there. Sloan, the log says, caller not on scene. It says they were watching him on a camera. They called 911 from their house in North Carolina. They weren't holding his hand. They were watching him die on an iPad. I heard the sound of a pen scratching furiously on paper on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" Mercer asked. "I am looking at it." I said, "I am taking a picture of it right now." I held my phone over the document. My hands were shaking. The turbulence of the plane mirroring the turbulence in my blood. I snapped 3 photos, one of the whole page, one of the header to prove the date, and one extreme close-up of the line. "Caller not on scene. Send it to me." Mercer said. Her voice had changed. It was no longer annoyed. It was hungry. "This is the smoking gun. Parker, if they swore in an affidavit that they were present to observe his capacity, and this document proves they were 1,000 miles away, their credibility is dead." I attached the photos to a new email. Subject: Evidence for Mercer/CAD summary. I hit send. They are trying to become temporary representatives so they can hide this. I realized, if they get control of the estate today, they can seal the records. They can fire the current security company. They can delete the footage history. They are not going to get control. Mercer said, "Not if I get this document in front of Judge Hargrove. When do you land?" 1 o'clock. I said, "Get to the courthouse." Mercer said, "Do not stop for food. Do not stop for luggage. Walk into that building like you own it. I will buy you time." "But Parker?" "Yes? Do not engage with them. If they text you, do not reply. If they call you, do not answer. They know they are losing. That makes them dangerous. They are going to try to bait you into saying something angry that they can read out loud in court. Silence is your best witness right now." "I understand." I said. I hung up. I sat back in the cramped seat. The engine noise was a dull roar, but my mind was razor sharp. I looked at the tray table. It was covered in digital evidence: the police slip, the airline notes, the dispatch log. My parents had spent my entire life telling me I was disorganized. They told me I was too emotional. They told me I couldn't handle the details. I looked at the line on the paper. Caller not on scene. They were the ones who were absent. They were the ones who watched life through a screen. They treated my grandfather like a surveillance subject and me like a security risk. I was done being a subject. I packed the papers back into the folder. I wiped the tray table clean. I checked the flight map. We were crossing the Mississippi River. 2 hours to Denver, then another hour to Durango. I was coming, and I was bringing the truth with me, cruising at 500 miles an hour. The hum of the aircraft engines created a white noise vacuum, a sonic barrier that separated me from the rest of the world. I stared out the oval window at the patchwork quilt of the Midwest 30,000 feet below. But my mind was not on the geography. It was traveling back in time, 3 weeks into the past, to a humid afternoon in Asheville. The memory was so sharp it felt like a physical intrusion. It was the day of the funeral. We were back at my parents' house, a sprawling colonial structure that always felt more like a showroom than a home. The air conditioning was set to a frigid 68 degrees, battling the North Carolina heat. The house was filled with people eating casseroles and speaking in hushed, respectful tones. My father, Bryce, had been performing the role of the grieving son with Oscar-worthy dedication. He wore a black suit that cost more than my first car. He stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch, accepting condolences with a solemn nod. I remembered walking into the study to find a quiet corner. My father followed me. He closed the door, shutting out the murmur of the guests. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with things unsaid. He walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was warm, heavy, and paternal. "You look exhausted, Parker," he had said. His voice was low, coated in a syrup of concern that I now recognized as condescension. "You have been running around so much. Why don't you head back to Charlotte early? Your mother and I can handle the paperwork here." I had looked at him, surprised. I was the one who had organized the catering. I was the one who had written the obituary. I was not tired. I was grieving. "I want to help with the inventory," I had replied. Grandpa had a lot of files. His eyes had flickered. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a second, but I saw it. His gaze darted over my shoulder to the mahogany desk where a stack of manila folders sat. It was a look of territorial panic. "There is no need for that," he said, squeezing my shoulder a fraction too hard. "You are not a lawyer. Parker, you are a project manager. This is legal stuff, complex stuff. You just rest. Let us carry the burden. Let us carry the burden." It sounded so noble. But as I sat on the plane, replaying that scene, I realized he wasn't offering to carry a weight. He was asking me to look away while he robbed the safe. And then there was my mother. Throughout that entire week in Asheville, she had been planting seeds. It was subtle at first, like invasive ivy taking root in a garden. We would be sitting at the kitchen table, peeling potatoes, and she would sigh. "Poor Dad." She would say, "Those last few months were so hard. He just wasn't himself." I would argue gently. "He seemed sharp when I FaceTimed him in April." I would say, "Oh, Parker," she would reply, giving me a pitying smile. "You were hundreds of miles away. You didn't see the confusion." He would call me at 2 a.m. talking about people who weren't there. He was completely lucid one minute and gone the next. The doctor said it was rapid onset dementia. She never showed me a diagnosis. She never showed me a prescription for memory medication. She just kept repeating the narrative. He was confused. He was lost. He didn't know what he was signing. At the time, I thought she was processing her grief. I thought she was trying to rationalize the decline of a man she loved. Now, staring at the clouds, I realized she wasn't grieving. She was litigating. She was building the foundation for a capacity argument. In probate law, if you can prove the testator was not of sound mind, the will is invalid. Every time she told a neighbor, a cousin, or me that Grandpa was confused, she was creating a witness. She was manufacturing a consensus reality where Everett Mallory was a senile old man who could be manipulated by anyone. But I knew Everett Mallory. My grandfather was a man who did the Sunday crossword puzzle in pen. He was a man who remembered the birthday of every single person in his platoon from Vietnam. He was a man who, 2 weeks before he died, had emailed me an article about sustainable concrete composites because he knew it was relevant to my job at Crestline Infrastructure Group. A man who discusses concrete composites is not a man who thinks the toaster is a telephone. I closed my eyes and let another memory surface. It was from 6 months ago. I had visited him in Durango. We were sitting on his back porch, watching the sun dip behind the San Juan Mountains. The air smelled of pine and impending snow. He had looked at me, his blue eyes sharp and clear. "Parker," he had said, "people think legacy is about what you leave behind. It is not. It is about who you trust to hold the map. He had taken a sip of his iced tea and leaned in. If I die, and things get ugly, and they might, because your father has always had an appetite larger than his plate, remember one thing. If they try to keep you out of the room, if they tell you that you don't need to be there, it means there is something in that room they are terrified you will hear. I had laughed it off at the time. I thought he was being dramatic. I thought he was just an old man venting about his son-in-law. But he was predicting the future. If they try to keep you out of the room, that was exactly what was happening. The airport detention, the canceled flight, the motion to proceed without me. They were building a fortress to keep me out of the room. I opened my eyes and pulled my notebook out of my bag. I needed to stop thinking like a daughter and start thinking like a professional. I work for Crestline Infrastructure Group. My job is to manage massive, chaotic construction projects. I deal with contractors who lie about delivery dates. I deal with soil reports that hide sinkholes. My entire career is built on one skill: finding the gap in the timeline. I drew a line down the center of the page. On the left side, I wrote, their story. Point 1. Grandpa was senile and incapacitated. Point 2. Parents were present at death and handled the emergency. Point 3. Parker is unstable and a security threat, on the right side. I wrote the data. Point 1. Grandpa emailed me technical articles 2 weeks prior. Point 2. CAD report shows caller not on scene. Point 3. Police report shows no arrest, and airline notes show impersonation. The data did not match the story. But why? Why were they fighting so hard? Why risk a felony charge for filing a false police report just to keep me away for 24 hours? Greed is usually lazy. This was not lazy greed. This was desperate greed. I thought about the estate. The house in Durango was nice. A timber-frame cabin on 40 acres. It was worth maybe $800,000. A decent sum, but not enough to justify this level of scorched earth warfare. My father's business debts were rumored to be in the millions. The house wouldn't even cover the interest. So what were they after? I remembered something else. A small detail from my visit. Grandpa had been excited about a letter he received from a geological survey company. He had tossed it on the coffee table. They want to drill. Parker, he had said, they think there is natural gas in the shale under the ridge. They offered me a lease. I had asked him if he was going to take it. No, he had said, it would ruin the water table. I told them to go to hell. I froze. The mineral rights. In Colorado, you can own the land, but not the minerals underneath it. Or you can own both. Grandpa owned both. If that survey was correct, the rights to extract gas from those 40 acres could be worth 10 times the value of the cabin. It could be worth millions in royalties over a 20-year lease. My father didn't want the house. He wanted the dirt, and he needed it now. If he could get appointed as the temporary personal representative, he would have the legal authority to manage the assets. He could sign a lease with the gas company on behalf of the estate. He could take the signing bonus, which could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, and use it to plug the holes in his own sinking business. He could leverage the future royalties to secure a loan. By the time the probate court sorted out the final will, the contracts would be signed, the land would be leased, the damage would be done. He wasn't trying to steal the inheritance permanently. He was trying to borrow against it before I could stop him. He was treating my grandfather's legacy like a line of credit. This explained the rush. This explained the desperation. He had a deadline, maybe a loan shark, maybe a bank call. He needed that signature today. I felt a cold fury settle in my stomach. It was cleaner than anger. It was fuel. I dug through my bag and pulled out the folder again. I looked for the document I had found tucked inside the back cover of Grandpa's journal, the one I had almost thrown away because it looked like a receipt. It was a codicil, a supplement to the will. It was handwritten, but it was notarized. The stamp belonged to a small notary in Durango, not the big law firm my parents used. I read the text again, the loop of Grandpa's handwriting familiar and comforting. I, Everett Mallory, being of sound mind, hereby add this provision to my last will and testament. In the event that my granddaughter, Parker Richardson, is prevented, obstructed, or delayed from attending the reading of this will or any subsequent hearings by any party named in this document, the following clause shall activate. I scanned down to the bottom. If such interference is proven, any bequest to the interfering party is immediately revoked, and the entire estate shall pass to a blind trust for the benefit of local education. With Parker Richardson as the sole trustee, my breath hitched. He knew. He didn't just suspect. He knew. He knew what my father was capable of. He had set a trap, a poison pill. But there was a catch. The codicil only worked if the interference was proven, if I just claimed they stopped me. It was my word against theirs. If I missed the hearing and they got control, they could shred this piece of paper before anyone saw it. That was why I needed to be there. I needed to walk into court and present the interference before they secured the appointment. I needed to show the judge that the condition of the codicil had been met. My parents thought they were playing chess. They thought they had removed the queen from the board. They didn't realize that the king had left a landmine under the table. I looked at my watch. We were descending. The pilot announced we would be landing in Denver in 20 minutes. I had a connection to make. I had a car to rent. I had a mountain to climb. My mother's text message echoed in my head. You will regret it. I looked at the codicil. I looked at the police report. I looked at the canceled ticket. I am not going to regret it. Mom, I thought, but you are. I put the papers away. I checked my appearance in the reflection of the dark screen. I looked tired. My blazer was wrinkled. My eyes were red. But I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like a witness. I was done feeling hurt that my parents didn't love me enough to play fair. I was done wondering why I wasn't enough for them. The answer was simple. I was an obstacle to their solvency. I was a line item they were trying to delete. So be it. I would not fight them with tears. I would not scream at them in the hallway. I would not give them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown that they could use to call me unstable. I would walk into that courtroom and I would lay down the timeline. I would lay down the timestamps. I would lay down the call logs. I would treat my family like a failing infrastructure project. I would expose the structural flaws. I would document the negligence, and then I would condemn the building. The plane wheels touched the runway with a violent jolt. I didn't flinch. Let the hearing begin. I landed in Durango just as the afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the La Plata Mountains, casting long, jagged shadows across the tarmac. The air here was different than in Charlotte or Denver. It was thin, crisp, and smelled faintly of pine resin and dust. It was the smell of my childhood summers. But today, it smelled like a battlefield. I powered on my phone before the plane had even taxied to a full stop. My battery was at 12%. I plugged it into my portable charger, treating the device like life support. Sloan Mercer was already on the line before I reached the rental car counter. We are entering the documentation phase, Mercer said. Her voice was clear, stripped of any sympathy, which was exactly what I needed. I do not want you to just tell me what happened. I need you to build a chain of custody. Do you understand what that means? I walked toward the exit, my boots echoing on the hard floor. It means I need to prove that the evidence hasn't been tampered with. I said, correct, Mercer said. In criminal law, a chain of custody ensures a bullet casing found at the scene is the same one presented to the jury. In probate law, it is looser. But we are going to treat this like a murder trial, because they are trying to murder your credibility. She rattled off a list of instructions that I followed with the mechanical precision of a soldier stripping a rifle. Keep the original thermal receipt from the airline, she ordered. Do not crumple it. Do not stain it with coffee. Put it in a plastic sleeve if you have one. Take a high-resolution photo of it right now. Email that photo to yourself, to me, and to the court clerk's exhibit address. The timestamp on the email serves as a digital notary. I stopped at a bench near the baggage claim. I flattened the flimsy piece of paper on my knee. I snapped the photo. I sent the email. Done. I said, next, the clerk. Mercer continued, you need to verify she received the exhibits you sent from the plane. Do not assume. Call her. Get a verbal confirmation. Then send a follow-up email summarizing the call. Dear clerk, Thank you for confirming receipt of exhibits A through C at 2:15 this afternoon. That creates a paper trail for the conversation itself. I made the call while standing in line for the rental car. The clerk was brief, sounding exhausted, but she confirmed she had printed the photos and placed them in the judge's chambers. I sent the follow-up email immediately. Now, let's talk about the airline, Mercer said. I already handled it, I said, shifting my weight as the line moved forward. I told the agent in Charlotte to flag the account for fraud. Good, Mercer said, but I want you to go a step further. I want you to request a written confirmation of that flag. I want an email from their corporate security department acknowledging that an unauthorized party accessed your account using personal data. Why? I asked. Because we are going to file a motion for sanctions, Mercer said. And I am not just asking for a slap on the wrist. I am asking the judge to find that your parents engaged in witness tampering. If I can prove they used stolen data to cancel your flight, I can argue that their entire petition for guardianship is fruit of the poisonous tree. I can argue that they are not fit to manage a lemonade stand, let alone an estate with mineral rights. I reached the front of the rental car line. I handed over my license and credit card. The agent, a cheerful woman with turquoise earrings, smiled at me. Just here for a visit? She asked. Business, I said. I got the keys to a white sedan. I walked out to the lot, the gravel crunching under my feet. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door. The silence inside the car was absolute. I have one more task for you, Mercer said, and this one is going to feel boring, but it is the deadliest thing you will do today. I am listening, I said. Call the Airport Police Administration in Charlotte, she said. Not the emergency line, the records division. Ask for the specific procedure to request a copy of the incident report and the preservation of the body camera footage. I already asked the officers to preserve it. I said, verbal requests disappear. Mercer said, written requests are forever. Ask them for the form number. Ask them for the email address of the records custodian, and then send a formal letter of preservation demand. Quote the incident number. State clearly that this evidence is material to pending litigation. I did as she asked. I spent 20 minutes in the parking lot of the Durango Airport, navigating a phone menu until I reached a clerk in North Carolina. I asked for the form. I got the email address. I typed out the demand on my phone. To the records custodian, please preserve all audio recordings, call logs, and body camera footage related to incident number 49201. These records are evidence in a civil matter regarding false reporting and harassment. I hit send. It felt anticlimactic. It was just an email. It was just a digital packet of data flying through the ether, but I knew what it represented. It meant that my father's panicked, acting class voice on that 911 call was now locked in a digital vault. He could not claim he was misunderstood. He could not claim he never said I was unstable. The tape existed, and now the law was guarding it. I started the car and drove out of the airport, heading toward the town. The mountains rose up on either side of the highway, majestic and indifferent to my small human drama. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not reacting anymore. I was building a trap. My phone buzzed again. It was my mother. I glanced at the screen. It was a long text, a wall of gray bubbles. Parker, we are so worried. Dad is beside himself. We are just trying to protect you. We are going to ask the court for a temporary guardianship just until you get back on your feet. You are clearly spiraling. Please turn around. Don't make us do this in public. I pulled over to the shoulder of the highway. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer toxicity of the gaslighting. Guardianship, spiraling, turn around. These were not random words. They were keywords. She was writing this text for an audience. She wanted to be able to show this to a judge and say, see, I begged her to get help. I was a concerned mother. I took a screenshot. I cropped it. I saved it to a folder on my phone labeled Evidence. Mercer had warned me about this. Do not reply. She had said, that is the golden rule for tonight. Do not reply. Why? I had asked. Because if you reply, you give them raw material. She explained, If you write a 3-paragraph defense of your sanity, and you use one angry word, they will take a screenshot of that one word and show it to the judge. They will say, "Look how aggressive she is." If you say nothing, they have nothing to edit. I looked at the text again. We are going to ask for a temporary guardianship. That was the threat. That was the nuclear option. If they got guardianship, they wouldn't just control the money, they would control me. They could dictate where I lived, what doctors I saw, and whether I could hire a lawyer. They were trying to strip me of my personhood to save their credit rating. I put the phone down. I did not type a single letter. I let their words hang in the void, unanswered and unacknowledged. I drove the rest of the way to the hotel. It was a historic place downtown, the kind with red brick walls and a lobby that smelled of old wood polish. I had booked it 2 weeks ago, using my own card. I walked up to the front desk. The clerk, a young man with a name tag that read Austin, looked up, checking in for Richardson. I said, "He typed my name." Then he frowned. He stopped typing and looked at a sticky note attached to the monitor. "Ms. Richardson," he said, looking confused. "We had a call about this reservation about an hour ago." My heart hammered against my ribs. "A call?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "A gentleman called. He said he was your father. He said there was a family emergency and that you wouldn't be making the trip. He tried to cancel the room." I felt the blood drain from my face. They hadn't just tried to stop me at the airport. They hadn't just tried to proceed in court without me. They had tried to ensure that even if I did arrive, I would have nowhere to sleep. They wanted me stranded in the mountains, in the dark, in my car. "Did you cancel it?" I asked, my voice tight. "No," Austin said. He couldn't verify the credit card number on file. We told him that for a same-day cancellation. We needed the cardholder to verify. He got pretty agitated. He hung up. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Thank you, Austin," I said. "I am here. The emergency is that my father is trying to control my movements. Please do not accept any calls from him or anyone else regarding my stay. And if he calls back, please tell him I checked in safely." "I want him to know." I want him to know he failed." Austin nodded, his eyes wide. "I will put a note on the account. Privacy mode. No transfers. No information given out." I took the key card. I went up to my room. It was small, cozy, and silent. I locked the door. I put the chain on. I propped a chair under the handle. It was paranoid, perhaps, but I was no longer operating in a world of normal social contracts. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. I connected to the hotel Wi-Fi. I had one last thing to do. Mercer had told me to stay silent with my parents. But she had said nothing about staying silent with the court. In fact, she had encouraged me to be loud, provided I was loud in the right way. I opened my email client. I composed a new message to the probate clerk, copying Mercer and the opposing counsel, my father's high-priced lawyer. Subject: Notice of appearance/hearing confirmation. I typed slowly, weighing every word. To the Honorable Court and all parties, I, Parker Richardson, am currently in Durango, La Plata County. I have arrived safely despite multiple documented attempts by the petitioners to interfere with my travel and cancel my accommodations. I will be present in person for the hearing scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I formally object to any ex parte proceedings or emergency motions filed on the basis of my absence or alleged incapacity. I am ready to proceed. Respectfully. Parker Richardson. I hit send. I imagined the notification popping up on my father's lawyer's phone. I imagined him calling my father. "She is there. Bryce, she made it." I imagined my parents sitting in their hotel room, just a few blocks away, realizing that their blockade had failed. They had fired every weapon they had. They had used the police. They had used the airline. They had used the hotel. They had used emotional blackmail. And yet, here I was. I did not order room service. I did not turn on the television. I laid out my clothes for the next morning: a navy blue suit, a white blouse, sensible heels, armor. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't lonely. It was the silence of a sniper waiting for the sun to come up. My phone buzzed one last time. I didn't look at it. I knew who it was. They were getting desperate. They were realizing that the silence on my end wasn't weakness. It was the sound of a woman who had stopped arguing and started documenting. I closed my eyes. I needed to sleep. I needed to be sharp. Tomorrow, I wasn't just going to a hearing. I was going to an execution of their lies. And I was the one holding the axe. The moment I stepped into the rental car in the Durango Airport parking lot. I did not start the engine. I locked the doors, adjusted the seat to create a makeshift office, and dialed the conference line number Sloan Mercer had texted me. It was exactly 2:00 in the afternoon, Mountain Time. The hearing had technically been scheduled for 10 in the morning, but Mercer had pulled a miracle. She had filed an emergency objection regarding procedural irregularity, forcing the judge to delay the start until he could review the exhibits I had sent from the plane. Now, the court was back in session, and I was attending via a speakerphone connection that hissed with the static of a bad signal. This is case number 24PR109, Estate of Everett Mallory. The clerk's voice announced. It sounded tinny and distant, echoing in the vast, wood-paneled room I could only imagine. Parties are present. Petitioner Bryce Richardson and counsel, Respondent Parker Richardson appearing telephonically due to interference. I held my breath. The word interference hung in the air like smoke. State your appearance, Judge Hargrove said. His voice was deep, gravelly, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years listening to families tear each other apart over china sets and lawnmowers. Sloan Mercer for the estate. Mercer said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the static. Arthur Sterling for the petitioners. A smooth baritone voice replied. That was my father's lawyer. He sounded expensive. He sounded like a man who billed $400 an hour to destroy daughters. Ms. Richardson? The judge asked. Are you on the line? I am here, Your Honor. I said. I leaned close to the dashboard, projecting my voice as if I were standing at the podium. I am currently in the parking lot of the Durango-La Plata County Airport. Very well, Judge Hargrove said. We are here on an emergency motion filed by the petitioners to appoint a temporary special administrator. Mr. Sterling, this is your motion. You claim the urgency is due to the respondent's unavailability and instability? Yes, Your Honor. Sterling began. I could hear the rustle of his suit as he moved. We are in a difficult position. My client, Mr. Richardson, is deeply concerned. We received information this morning that Ms. Richardson was detained by law enforcement at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. She was removed from the checkpoint in handcuffs. I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles turned white. It was a lie so bold, so visual, that it was designed to stick in the judge's mind forever. He wanted the judge to picture me as a criminal, thrashing against authority. She was making threats against the airport infrastructure. Sterling continued, his voice dripping with faux regret, given this erratic behavior, and the fact that she is currently in custody, or at least detained for mental evaluation. We believe she is unfit to participate in the preservation of the estate assets. We are asking for immediate temporary letters of administration to secure the property. Silence followed. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. Is that so? Judge Hargrove asked. In handcuffs? That is what we were told. Your Honor, Sterling said. Ms. Mercer? The judge asked. I heard Mercer stand up. I could picture her, a small woman with silver hair and a spine made of titanium. Your Honor, Mercer said, her voice cool and deadly. If Mr. Sterling's client is so concerned about the truth, perhaps he should explain why Exhibit A, which I emailed to the court 30 minutes ago, tells a different story. I have the exhibit, the judge said. I heard the shuffling of paper. Incident number 49201. Airport Police. Read the disposition code, if you would. Your Honor, Mercer suggested. There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. Stopped. The judge read aloud. Identified. Cleared. No arrest. No charges. Subject released to proceed. The silence in the courtroom changed texture. It went from tense to confused. This document serves as an official police record, Mercer said. Ms. Richardson was not arrested. She was not handcuffed. She was subjected to a malicious false report filed by a caller who identified himself as a family member. That is speculation. Sterling interrupted, though his voice lacked its earlier polish. Is it? Judge Hargrove asked. Mr. Sterling, does your client deny making the call to the airport police? I could hear whispering. My father was whispering to his lawyer. He was probably trying to spin it, trying to say he was just a concerned dad. My client was acting on information he received that his daughter was in distress. Sterling said carefully, He has a duty to public safety. A duty to public safety, the judge repeated. He sounded unimpressed. And does this duty also extend to the airline industry? I do not follow. Sterling said, I am looking at Exhibit B. The judge said, Internal notes from the airline reservation system. It appears that a Mr. Bryce Richardson called the airline at 6:45 this morning to cancel the respondent's ticket. Your Honor, that is, the reason listed is passenger safety. The judge continued, reading from the page I had sent. He claimed she was not safe to travel alone. Tell me, Mr. Sterling, if Miss Richardson was in police custody as you claim, why did your client need to cancel her flight? The police would have prevented her from flying. Canceling her ticket seems redundant, unless, of course, he knew she was free to go and wanted to stop her himself. The logic hit the room like a hammer. My father had overplayed his hand. If I was a criminal, the cops would stop me. If I wasn't, he had no right to stop me, by doing both. He proved he was terrified of my arrival. My client was merely trying to prevent a tragedy. Sterling stammered. He believes his daughter is having a breakdown. Mr. Richardson, the judge's voice boomed. It was not directed at the lawyer anymore. It was directed at the man standing beside him. I am going to give you a piece of advice. Do not diagnose your daughter in my courtroom as a litigation tactic. You are not a psychiatrist. You are a petitioner in a probate case. But she is unstable, my father blurted out. It was the first time I had heard his voice. It was tight, high-pitched, stripping away the smooth, concerned citizen mask. She's obsessed with this money. She is making up conspiracies. Your Honor, I said into the phone, I didn't wait for permission. I just spoke. I am not obsessed with money. I am obsessed with attendance. And the only conspiracy here is the one where my father calls a hotel in Durango to cancel my room because he is afraid of what I will say when I get there. Ms. Richardson claims you tried to cancel her hotel. The judge said, Is that true? No, my father shouted. Absolutely not. Then you won't mind if I order a subpoena for the hotel's call records as part of the sanctions hearing? Mercer interjected smoothly. The silence that followed was absolute. My father didn't answer. He knew. He knew that Austin at the front desk had logged the call. He knew that the airline had the tape. He knew that the police had the audio. Enough, Judge Hargrove said. The sound of a file slamming shut echoed through the speaker. I am looking at a pattern here. Mr. Sterling, a pattern of interference, police reports, airline cancellations, and now, a motion to proceed ex parte based on a detention that never happened. Your Honor, we still believe— I do not care what you believe, the judge snapped. I care about due process. And due process requires that the beneficiary be present. I am denying your motion to proceed without Ms. Richardson. I am denying your request for temporary special administration. I let out a breath, my forehead resting against the steering wheel. Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being heard. For weeks, they had told me I was crazy. For weeks, they had told me I was remembering things wrong. But the law didn't care about gaslighting. The law cared about documents. We are continuing this hearing to 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, the judge ordered. And Mr. Sterling? Yes, Your Honor? I want your client to bring his phone records, all of them, texts, calls, data, from the last 48 hours. If I find one more instance of him contacting a service provider to interfere with the respondent's travel or accommodation, I will not just sanction him, I will hold him in contempt. Understood, Sterling said, his voice barely a whisper. "And one more thing," the judge added. His tone shifted. It became less angry and more intrigued. "Ms. Mercer?" "Yes. Your Honor? I see a note here in the file regarding a sealed item." The judge said, "Item number 7B. Submitted by the decedent, Everett Mallory, 3 months prior to his death." My heart skipped a beat. A sealed item? Grandpa hadn't told me about a sealed item. He had mentioned the codicil in the journal, but he had filed something with the court? "Yes, Your Honor." Mercer said, "Mr. Mallory deposited it with the court clerk for safekeeping. The instructions on the envelope state that it is only to be opened in the presence of all parties." "Is Parker Richardson a required party for the opening of this envelope?" the judge asked. "The instructions specifically name her," Mercer said. "It says, 'To be opened only when my granddaughter, Parker, is standing in the room.'" I felt a chill run down my spine. Standing in the room. He knew. He knew they would try to keep me out. He had made my physical presence the key to the lock. Interesting. Judge Hargrove said, "Very well. We will open item 7B tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Ms. Richardson, drive safely. Do not speed. We will wait for you. Thank you. Your Honor," I whispered. "Court is adjourned." The line went dead. I sat in the silence of the rental car. The sun was beating down on the windshield, turning the interior into a greenhouse, but I felt cold. Item 7. B. My father had tried to stop me with the police. He had tried to stop me with the airline. He had tried to stop me with the hotel. And now I knew why. He wasn't just afraid of the dispatch log. He wasn't just afraid of the mineral rights. He was afraid of whatever was in that envelope. I looked at the phone in my hand. It was just a piece of glass and metal. But it had just saved my life, or at least, the life I was fighting to keep. For the first time in 3 weeks, the system had worked. The gears of justice, usually so slow and grinding, had caught a snag, my father's lies, and had ground them to dust. "Do not diagnose your daughter." That sentence would ring in my ears for the rest of my life. I started the car. The engine purred to life. I put the gear shift in drive. I had a hotel to get to. I had a suit to iron. I had a war to finish. I drove out of the parking lot, merging onto the highway that led to town. My father was probably in his lawyer's office right now, screaming, blaming everyone but himself. He was probably trying to figure out how to delete his call history, not realizing that subpoenas don't care about the delete button. Let him scream. Tomorrow, at 10 o'clock, the envelope would open, and whatever was inside, I would be standing there to see it, just like Grandpa wanted. The motel was a low-slung building on the edge of town, the kind of place with exterior corridors and neon vacancy signs that buzzed like trapped insects. It was miles away from the historic hotel where I had originally booked a room, the reservation my father had tried to cancel. I had checked into that hotel earlier just to prove a point, but I did not stay there. I knew my father. If he knew where I was, he would come knocking. He would bring his lawyer, his loud voice, and his performance. So I left. I drove my rental car to this nondescript motor lodge, paid cash for a room at the back, and parked the white sedan behind a dumpster. I was not hiding because I was afraid. I was hiding because I needed silence. The room smelled of lemon polish and old carpet. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and placed the case file on the nightstand. I set it down gently, squaring the edges, treating it less like a collection of papers and more like a loaded weapon I would need in the morning. My phone, which I had placed on the stained wooden dresser, lit up. It had been lighting up for hours. I picked it up and watched the screen. Missed call. Dad. Missed call. Mom. Voicemail. New. I pressed play on the speakerphone, keeping the volume low. My father's voice filled the small room. It was not the angry voice from the courtroom hearing earlier that day. It was the wheedling, pathetic voice of a man trying to sell a used car with a cracked engine. "Parker, honey, please pick up. We are just sitting here at the hotel. Worrying about you. You sounded so unlike yourself in court today. We just want to talk. We can fix this. Just come to our room. We can order room service. We can talk about Grandpa. Please, baby, don't let strangers decide our family business." He sounded so reasonable. If you didn't know he had called the police to arrest me 12 hours ago, you might have believed him. Then I opened my text messages. The tone was different. The texts were not from my father. They were from my mother. And there was no room service in her words. "If you go into that courtroom tomorrow, we will file for emergency guardianship. We have the logs of your behavior. We have the testimony. You are clearly having a manic episode. We will take control of your medical decisions. Parker, stop this now." I looked from the voicemail to the text. The velvet glove and the iron fist. They were hitting me from both sides, trying to find the frequency that would shatter me. They thought that if they squeezed hard enough, I would revert to being their little girl, the one who just wanted everyone to get along. I turned the phone over, placing it face down. I am not that girl anymore. I whispered to the empty room. A knock on the door made me jump. It was 3 sharp raps. Quick, decisive. I froze. I looked at the door. I had engaged the deadbolt and the chain, but the wood looked thin. Had they found me? Had my father hired a private investigator? I stood up and walked silently to the window. I pulled back the edge of the blackout curtain just a fraction of an inch. Standing under the yellow glow of the corridor light was not my father. It was not a lawyer. It was a woman in a heavy denim jacket and work boots, her gray hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She was holding a large manila envelope against her chest. I recognized her instantly. It was Darla Quinn. She was my grandfather's neighbor. She lived on the property adjacent to his. A woman who raised goats and didn't suffer fools. I hadn't seen her in 2 years, but I remembered her eyes. They were sharp, assessing, and kind in a rough way. I opened the door, leaving the chain on. "Ms. Quinn?" I asked through the crack. "Open the door." "Parker," she said. Her voice was like gravel. "I saw your rental car. I knew you would pick a place like this. Everett always said you were practical." I undid the chain and opened the door. She stepped inside, bringing the smell of cold night air and tobacco smoke with her. She didn't hug me. She didn't offer condolences. She walked straight to the small round table by the window and placed the envelope down. "He told me to wait." She said, "Wait for what?" I asked, locking the door behind her. "He told me to wait until the night before the final hearing." He said, "Darla, if Parker makes it to town, and if her parents are acting like wolves, you go find her. If they are acting decent, you burn this. But if they are hunting her, you give it to her." She looked at me. I heard about the police at the airport. She said, "The whole town heard. Your daddy has been making noise all over Durango. So they are wolves," I said. Darla nodded. "Worse, they are scavengers." She pushed the envelope toward me. I sat down and opened the clasp. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. I pulled out a stack of documents. They were heavy, printed on thick bond paper. The first document was an affidavit. It was notarized. I looked at the date. It was signed 3 weeks before he died. I started to read. "I, Everett Mallory, make this statement of my own free will, while of sound mind and body. I am writing this because I fear that my daughter and her husband, Bryce Richardson, intend to challenge my final wishes over the past 6 months. They have subjected me to a campaign of pressure and isolation. They have told me that I am forgetting things when I am not. They have moved my papers and claimed I lost them. They have tried to force me to sign powers of attorney by telling me that I am already under their legal care. I am not." I felt tears prick my eyes. He knew. He hadn't just been annoyed. He had been fighting a psychological war in his own home. I read on. "They use paperwork and fear to control me. They tell me that if I do not sign, the state will take my home. They tell me that my granddaughter, Parker, is too busy to care, or that she is sick. I know these are lies, but I'm physically weak, and I cannot fight them off forever, so I am writing this to speak for me when I cannot." I turned the page. Attached to the affidavit was a bank document. It was not a statement. It was a safe deposit box, key release form, and a code. Box 404 at First National Bank of Durango. The note read, contains the original geological surveys and the unredacted mineral lease offers. Do not let Bryce see these numbers. And then, underneath that, a business card stapled to the page. Samuel Vance, independent professional fiduciary. There was a handwritten note from Grandpa next to the card. I have already met with Mr. Vance. I have paid his retainer. If the court questions my capacity or the validity of my will, I have appointed Samuel Vance to serve as the independent administrator of my estate. He has my instructions. He knows about the gas rights. He knows Bryce's debts. Call him. He hadn't just left me a defense. He had left me a replacement. He knew that my parents would attack me, that they would try to say I was unfit to be the executor, so he had hired a professional, a neutral third party, to stand in the gap. He had removed the target from my back and placed it on a man my parents couldn't bully. I looked up at Darla. He planned all of this. I said, he was a Marine. Parker, Darla said, leaning against the dresser. He didn't like being ambushed. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. And this is from me, she said. I unfolded it. It was a handwritten statement, signed and dated today. I, Darla Quinn, reside at 104 Pine Ridge Road. On the night of October 14th, I saw the ambulance lights at Everett's house. I ran over. I met the paramedics in the driveway. The house was locked. We had to break the door frame to get in. I read the next line, and the room seemed to get brighter, as if a spotlight had been turned on. There was no one else in the house. Bryce and his wife were not there. I asked the dispatcher who called, and they said the family called. I did not see Bryce's car arrive until 4 hours later, after the coroner had already left. I looked at the computer-aided dispatch summary in my file. Caller not on scene. My parents had sworn in court documents that they were at his bedside holding his hand when he passed. They had built their entire narrative of caring for him on that lie. They claimed they knew his state of mind at the moment of death because they were there, but they weren't. They were watching on a camera, and they didn't show up until the body was gone. This kills their credibility. I said, it destroys it. Darla nodded. I told the police that night. She said, but nobody wrote it down because it wasn't a crime scene. It was just an old man dying. But I wrote it down. I stood up. I felt a surge of energy that cut through the exhaustion. I grabbed my phone. I need to send this to Mercer. I said. I laid the documents out on the bedspread. I took photos of each page, ensuring the notary stamps and signatures were in sharp focus. I took a picture of Darla's statement. I took a picture of the business card. I opened my email app. I drafted a new message to Sloan Mercer. Subject: Supplemental Evidence / Affidavit of Everett Mallory. I attached the files. I added a single line of text. Grandpa left a backup plan, and we have a witness who places the petitioners 4 hours away from the deathbed. I hit send. The phone swooshed. The evidence was gone, flying through the digital darkness to the lawyer who would wield it like a sword in the morning. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Mercer. I opened the text. I just reviewed the attachments. Parker, this is not just a win. This is a massacre. The appointment of the independent fiduciary trumps their application entirely, and the affidavit regarding their bullying, that is grounds for disinheritance under the Terror Clause. A second text popped up. Get some sleep. Tomorrow morning, they are not just going to lose the estate. They are going to lose the right to tell the story about you. We are going to rewrite the history of this family in the public record. I looked at the phone. They will lose the right to tell the story. That was it. That was what this was all about. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the house. It was about the narrative. For 30 years, my parents had told the story of Parker the screw-up, Parker the emotional one, Parker the one who needed to be managed. They had told it so many times they believed it. They had told it to the police. They had told it to the airline. But Grandpa had written a different story. And Darla had witnessed a different story. I looked at Darla. Thank you, I said. She pushed herself off the dresser. You look like him, she said, around the eyes, when he was angry. She walked to the door. Lock this behind me, she said. And Parker? Yes. Don't let them see you cry tomorrow. They feed on that. You walk in there like you are the one holding the deed, because you are. She slipped out into the night. I locked the deadbolt. I put the chain back on. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. The fluorescent light hummed above me, casting harsh shadows. I looked at my reflection. I saw the dark circles under my eyes. I saw the messy hair. I saw the wrinkles in my shirt. But for the first time in my life, I didn't see a victim. I didn't see the daughter who was desperate for approval. I didn't see the woman who had been detained at an airport. I saw a witness. I saw the custodian of the truth. I walked back into the bedroom. I turned off the lamp. I lay down in the dark, the file folder on the nightstand next to my head. My parents were probably sleeping in their expensive hotel sheets, confident that their threats of guardianship had scared me into submission. They probably thought I was crying in a corner. They didn't know that I wasn't crying. I was waiting, and in my hand, I held the pen that was going to write the final chapter. The morning sun hit the stone steps of the La Plata County Courthouse with a brilliance that felt almost blinding. I walked up those steps, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the concrete, flanked by Sloane Mercer. I wore the navy blue suit I had ironed in the motel room. My hair was pulled back. My spine was straight. I did not look like a woman who was spiraling. I looked like a woman who had come to audit a failing company. Inside the courtroom, the air was cool and smelled of furniture polish and anxiety. My parents were already seated at the petitioner's table. When I walked in, my father turned. For a split second, his face crumbled. It was a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He had spent 24 hours trying to erase me from this timeline, and yet, here I was. Flesh and blood and legal standing. He recovered quickly. He nudged my mother, and they both rearranged their features into the masks of concern they had worn since the airport. My mother reached out as if to wave, a small, trembling gesture meant to signal to the room that she was the loving parent reaching across the divide. I did not wave back. I did not look at them. I sat down next to Mercer and placed my heavy file folder on the table. Judge Hargrove entered the room. The bailiff called for order. The judge took his seat, his eyes scanning the room over the rim of his glasses. He looked at my father, then at me. The record will reflect that the respondent, Parker Richardson, is present in the courtroom, Judge Hargrove stated. My father's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, stood up. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth but slightly hurried. We are relieved that Ms. Richardson could make it. However, given the events of yesterday and the fragility of her current state, we still believe that a temporary special administrator is necessary to protect the assets while we sort out these family issues. Mercer stood up. She didn't look fragile. She looked like a scalpel, Your Honor. Mercer said, There are no family issues here. There are criminal issues. And before this court considers granting the petitioners control over a single postage stamp of this estate, I must present evidence regarding their conduct over the last 48 hours. Proceed, the judge said. Mercer walked to the bench. She handed over the stack of documents I had compiled in the motel room, organized into a devastating sequence. Exhibit A. Mercer announced, the incident report from the Charlotte Airport Police. It confirms that the petitioners filed a false report claiming the respondent was a security threat. The police found no threat. They found a daughter trying to catch a flight. Exhibit B, she continued. Internal notes from the airline. The petitioner, Bryce Richardson, impersonated a medical contact to cancel the respondent's ticket. He did not do this to save her. He did it to stop her. Exhibit C, she said, laying down the screenshot of the text message. A threat from the petitioner's wife to file for emergency guardianship if Parker appeared in court. This is not the language of concern, Your Honor. This is the language of coercion. I watched my parents. My father was staring at the table. My mother was gripping her purse so tightly, her knuckles were white. They had thought their texts and calls were private weapons. They didn't realize that in a court of law, everything is evidence. And finally, Mercer said, her voice dropping an octave, Exhibit D, The computer-aided dispatch summary from the night Everett Mallory died, coupled with the sworn statement of his neighbor, Darla Quinn. Sterling jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? The relevance is credibility. Mr. Sterling, Mercer shot back, your clients filed a sworn affidavit stating they were at the decedent's bedside, caring for him and observing his capacity at the time of death. This police log shows that when the ambulance arrived, the house was locked and empty. The caller was not on scene. The courtroom went dead silent. Judge Hargrove picked up the dispatch log. He read it. He looked at the neighbor's statement. Then he looked at my parents. You were not there? The judge asked. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. My father stood up. We were monitoring him, he stammered. We have a camera system. We were watching from North Carolina. We called the moment we saw him fall. So you were watching him die on a screen, the judge said, his voice ice cold. And you waited until today to clarify that distinction? You filed a sworn document implying physical presence. That is perjury. Mr. Richardson. My father sank back into his chair. He looked smaller now. The suit that looked so expensive yesterday now looked like a costume. Mercer returned to our table. But she wasn't done, Your Honor. She said, We believe this desperation to control the estate is driven by more than just parental overreach. We have reason to believe it is driven by debt. She pointed to the sealed envelope that sat on the judge's bench. Item 7B. Judge Hargrove reached for the envelope. This is the item submitted by Mr. Mallory prior to his death, he said, the one to be opened only in the presence of his granddaughter. He picked up a letter opener. The sound of tearing paper was the loudest noise in the room. He pulled out a single sheet of handwritten stationery and a notarized document. He read it in silence. His eyebrows went up. He read it again. This changes things, the judge said. He looked out at the courtroom. Everett Mallory wrote this letter 3 months ago, the judge said. He writes, If my granddaughter Parker is late, or if she is missing, it is because she has been obstructed. I am filing this to ensure that if I am silenced. My wishes are not. The judge picked up the second document. This is an affidavit regarding a business proposal. The judge continued. It states that on July 4th, Bryce Richardson presented Everett Mallory with a contract to lease the mineral rights of the mountain property to a natural gas extraction company. Mr. Richardson asked to be a co-signatory so he could use the projected royalties as collateral for a business loan. I looked at my father. He was gray. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the exit. Mr. Mallory refused. The judge read, and because of that refusal, Mr. Mallory feared that upon his death, Mr. Richardson would attempt to seize control of the estate to sign that lease before the probate process was complete. The judge set the paper down. That explains the rush, he said. That explains the false police report. That explains the canceled flight. You were not trying to protect your daughter from a breakdown. Mr. Richardson, you were trying to beat the clock on a loan application. My mother began to cry. It wasn't the polite, silent weeping of a funeral. It was the ugly, jagged sobbing of someone who realizes the game is over. Judge Hargrove leaned forward. I am denying the motion for temporary special administration. He ruled. I am denying the motion to proceed ex parte. He looked at my father. Mr. Richardson, you are hereby removed from any consideration as a personal representative. Furthermore, I am appointing Mr. Samuel Vance, the independent fiduciary named in Mr. Mallory's backup documents, to take immediate possession of all estate assets. The judge's gavel hovered. I am also issuing a protective order, he said. Neither the petitioner nor his wife are to approach the property, access the bank accounts, or contact the respondent regarding estate business. Any communication must go through Mr. Vance, and regarding the conduct I have seen here, the judge added, his eyes narrowing, the false reporting to the airport police, the impersonation of a customer to the airline, the perjury regarding the deathbed attendants, I am referring this file to the district attorney's office for review. You used the Patriot Act and the safety of the flying public as a tool for your greed. I will not let that stand. My father put his head in his hands. Parker Richardson is confirmed as the sole beneficiary of the residual estate, the judge concluded. Mercer touched my arm. This was it, the victory. But I had one more thing to do, Your Honor, I said. Standing up, yes, Ms. Richardson? The judge asked. I would like to make a request regarding the distribution. I said. My voice was steady. I was not the girl they had described. I was the woman my grandfather had raised. The judge nodded. Go ahead. My grandfather did not want the land drilled. I said, he wanted the water protected, but he also believed in education. I would like to direct the independent administrator to set aside the mineral rights into a conservation easement, so they can never be mined, and I would like to take the liquid assets that would have gone to family members and use them to establish a scholarship fund for local students in Darla Quinn's name. The courtroom was quiet. My parents looked up. They realized that not only had they lost the money, but the money was going to be used to honor the neighbor who had exposed them. It was the ultimate rejection of their narrative. They wanted the money to cover their debts. I was using it to cover their shame. That is a noble request, Judge Hargrove said. It will be entered into the order. He banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. The sound rang out like a bell. I watched my parents leave. They didn't look at me. They walked out with their lawyer, arguing in hushed, frantic whispers about criminal defense attorneys and bail money. They looked small. They looked like strangers. I picked up my file. I walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. Mercer was smiling. You did good. Parker, she said, you didn't say a word to them. You let the paper do the talking. I walked out the front doors of the courthouse. The air was thin and sweet. The mountains rose up in the distance, purple and majestic. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't just relief. It was the feeling of setting down a heavy bag I had been carrying for 30 years. My parents had tried to force me into a version of myself that fit their needs. The unstable Parker, the weak Parker, the Parker who needed them to survive. They had packed that version of me into a suitcase and tried to check it in at the airport. But I didn't get on that flight. I stood on the courthouse steps, taking a deep breath. They wanted me absent so they could win. But in the end, the thing that defeated them wasn't a lawyer, and it wasn't a judge. It was me. I was present. I was on time. And I had the receipts. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below sharing your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this journey of justice, please subscribe to Emma Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need to hear that the truth always wins.